What if, almost overnight, a single, narrow waterway decided the fate of global energy supply? That's not a hypothetical. Right now, the head of one of the world's most important energy watchdogs is sounding the alarm, and the clock is ticking. Here's what we know. The chief of the International Energy Agency, the IEA, has issued a stark warning. Global energy security is at serious risk if the Strait of Hormuz does not reopen within weeks. That's the core of it, not months, weeks. The IEA chief's language was direct and urgent, framing this not as a regional shipping problem, but as a threat to the stability of energy supply worldwide. The Strait of Hormuz, for those who need a quick reminder, is a narrow choke point between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. It's one of the most strategically critical waterways on the planet, and right now, its status as an open, functioning passage is under question in a way that is rattling the highest levels of international energy governance. So why does a strait, a body of water only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, carry this kind of weight? Because of what flows through it. Roughly a fifth of the world's total oil supply passes through the Strait of Hormuz. That includes crude oil, refined petroleum products, and liquefied natural gas, LNG, primarily from major producers in the Gulf region. Countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, and Iran all depend on this passage to export their energy to the rest of the world. Japan, South Korea, China, India, and much of Europe receive significant shares of their energy through this single corridor. There is simply no easy alternative. A handful of pipelines exist that can carry some Gulf oil overland and bypass the strait, but their combined capacity is nowhere near enough to replace what moves through Hormuz on any given day. So when the IEA's chief says global energy security is at risk, he's not being dramatic. He's describing a physical reality baked into the architecture of global energy infrastructure. Let's talk about how a disruption here actually ripples through the global economy, because the mechanics matter. Oil markets are priced globally. When a major supply route faces uncertainty, traders, refiners, and governments don't wait to see what happens. Uncertainty alone tends to shift behavior. Refiners may begin drawing down strategic reserves or scrambling to secure alternative supply. Shipping companies reassess their routes and their risk exposure. Insurance markets, specifically what's known as war risk insurance, tend to respond to elevated threat levels in waterways like this one. War risk premiums are the additional costs that ship operators pay to insure vessels moving through areas deemed dangerous. When those premiums rise, the cost of moving a barrel of oil goes up, and that cost eventually finds its way into the price of fuel and goods downstream. Now layer on top of that the liquefied natural gas dimension. LNG is particularly sensitive to supply disruptions because, unlike pipeline gas, it must be liquefied, loaded onto specialized tankers, shipped, and then regasified at the destination. That's a long, capital-intensive chain, and it's heavily dependent on the Strait of Hormuz remaining open. European countries that have been working to diversify away from Russian gas and toward LNG imports from the Gulf are especially exposed to any prolonged closure. The IEA exists precisely to manage moments like this. Established after the oil crisis of the early 1970s, the agency coordinates strategic petroleum reserves among its member nations, reserves that governments can release in a coordinated way to cushion a supply shock. But even that mechanism has limits. Strategic reserves are a buffer, not a replacement. They buy time. They don't solve a prolonged physical blockage of one of the world's most critical waterways. What are the real-world consequences if the strait remains closed, or severely restricted, for weeks? The impact fans out in several directions. First, energy prices. Tighter supply from a major producing region, combined with elevated shipping costs and insurance premiums, typically puts upward pressure on oil and gas prices globally. That feeds directly into household energy bills, fuel costs for airlines and logistics companies, and input costs for manufacturers. Essentially, it adds inflationary pressure across a wide range of industries. Second, geopolitical weight shifts. A prolonged disruption at Hormuz changes the strategic calculus for energy importing nations. Countries that have built their energy policy around Gulf imports are suddenly exposed. Governments may accelerate moves toward alternative suppliers or, and this is the longer-term play, toward renewable energy and storage technologies that reduce dependence on imported fossil fuels altogether. Third, and perhaps most immediately, there's the question of energy poverty and inequality. When energy prices spike, the burden falls hardest on lower-income households and on developing economies that lack the financial cushion to absorb higher import bills. The IEA chief's warning, then, isn't just about markets. It's about the lived reality of people who depend on affordable energy for heating, transportation, and basic economic activity. And finally, there's the signaling effect. When the head of the IEA uses the phrase "global energy security at risk" in the context of a specific time frame, weeks, not months, that is a calibrated institutional alarm. It's designed to focus diplomatic and political attention. Whether that attention translates into action is, of course, the open question. So how do we classify what's happening here? This is a geopolitical energy security event, one of the most serious categories in global economics. It sits at the intersection of physical infrastructure risk, commodity markets, international diplomacy, and macroeconomic stability. Events of this type are relatively rare in their severity, but they're not without precedent. The Strait of Hormuz has been a flashpoint in global energy politics for decades, from the tanker wars of the 1980s to more recent episodes of tension involving drone attacks and vessel seizures. Each time, the world has been reminded of just how concentrated and fragile the arteries of global energy supply really are. What makes the current situation notable enough for the IEA chief to speak in such direct terms is the compressed time frame he's identified. Weeks. That's the window he's drawing around the risk. It suggests that behind the public statement, there is a serious assessment of the gap between strategic reserve capacity and the duration of a potential prolonged disruption. For investors, this is a moment to understand, not to react emotionally to, but to understand. Energy security events of this kind tend to affect oil and gas equities, shipping stocks, LNG infrastructure plays, and the broader inflation outlook. They also tend to accelerate policy conversations about energy diversification and strategic resilience. The IEA's warning is, in essence, a flare sent up over the global economy. Whether the strait reopens in weeks, as hoped, or whether this becomes a longer and more consequential disruption, will determine how much of that flare's light we actually have to reckon with. If you found this breakdown useful, subscribe to Investors Club Global for clear, trustworthy analysis of the financial news that actually moves markets. Hit the like button. It helps more people find this channel. And drop your questions in the comments. We read them, and they shape what we cover next.